So, welcome to the ☍𝕉𝕣𝕣𝕣𝕣𝕣𝕣𝕣𝕣𝕣 Witchcraft podcast. Liam's made me do this again because he's in one of them moods, innit? So, the podcast name today is Ice Cream Cones of Power. Now, it's been on our list for quite some time. I think it's actually one of the really early ones, isn't it, Liam?
Yeah, since the 1950s, I think it's been on the list.
So I think so. We'd added it on the list originally to talk about Gardner. I think is what we'd originally assumed we were going to do, and potentially talk about the Operation Cone. Was it Operation Cones of Power? Something like that. It was called.
You don't mean the Nazi thing.
The Nazi thing.
And stop the Nazis from stop Adolf Hitler coming over here.
Yeah, stop him coming across.
Yeah. Make his UFO crash.
Yeah. But surely an ice cream cone of power is just what he'd need to land on, wouldn't it?
Hey, it's tough at the top. It's tough at the top of any type of pyramid.
So originally the idea was we were going to talk about that. What's made us kind of bring it forward today, because you know what we're like. We just find a way to make all of these titles fit, regardless of whether or not they're planned. So today we're having a really interesting conversation with one of our mentees. Just in case you'd all forgotten about that mentorship thing we do. And we were talking about the publications of a certain esoteric writer from down south, and not down south in the US, down south in the UK, and about their approaches on kind of a Wiccan approach to the Kabbalah, with a C, not a K. Or a Q. That one's always a fun one.
The Q-Bala.
But we kind of brought it. We were chatting about that, which was a really interesting chat, which will no doubt end up in not a book review in the future of that certain trilogy. But it just kind of had us talking about kind of the understanding of perspective, which I think we talk about a lot about, and often comes across as us belittling people. And like, obviously when you're on 30 stories above somebody, they do look rather small.
Oh, Chris, you're such a nasty bitch.
So, but that's just perspective. It's got nothing to do with you being rude. You know that person is just as tall as you, or you guess they're roughly about your stature, but it's difficult to see that from such a height. But what was interesting really about kind of deconstructing this book, having not even read it, just kind of looking at little reviews of it and looking at the kind of content structure and kind of making some big assumptions about what the books would actually be written about, which is quite easy for us to do because we actually understand the text that they are talking about, as opposed to just, making a swinging grab at it. So it's interesting. Like, both of us made similar I went to say suspicions. No, I don't mean
assumptions.
that. Assumptions.
We were assuming things, not having read the book or books. However, I think we will read at least one of them. So we're doing this today. I think, did you say we're going to put our assumptions out publicly, and then we're going to do the reading part and the research part, actually read what the author has to say, and then we'll see whether we have to go back and say, actually, we got it wrong. This book is actually very good, and other such stuff. We might have to eat our own words. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, because I think some people just think we're Fausty, and that we've just got nothing nice to say about things,
Mm.
when actually we are approaching something from a point of knowledge, and actually going, and that is for us, this is an educated guess. It's not a random swing at somebody's practice, which is what it's often deduced to. And I just don't, I get somewhat annoyed, however amusing it is to be Fausty. It's actually not the point of what we're doing. You know, in the politest possible way, we are educators first. And Faustiness is just part of the way that we deliver it in order to make it fun and enjoyable to digest for you as listeners. So it's kind of when it is kind of, we're just reduced to being Fausty nasty witches who have never got a nice thing to say about anybody. Just kind of feels like that's very one-dimensional for something as multi-dimensional as us beings.
So we're going to attempt to judge a book by its cover.
Yes.
Judge an entire trilogy, I think, by its covers.
Yes.
And some comments, reviews, and the contents page that's on the free read me part on Amazon, I'm presuming. Open me up type thing. And then we will come back and do another chit chat, presumably about after we actually read it. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Where are we starting with? Reviews, or are we starting with the story of how we found this book? What do you want to start with? Do you want to name the book or not? Or should we do that in the naughty bit?
We can do that in the naughty bit. I think what's important is that I think it's important to say I find it admirable that someone is attempting to do it, and I can understand why somebody would. Like it is, like I said earlier today to you, Liam, like I can understand why somebody would want, with the popularity amongst the uninitiated, to have see, that made me sound like I really care about initiation.
No, it made you sound like another nasty bitchy session. That did. It's like, oh, the uninitiated. You mean the plebs, the ones that do not know yet think they do.
But let's face it, they're the ones that are all chasing down chaos magic, aren't they? Let's face it, generally speaking.
Oh, now he's shitting on chaos magic. I love it.
But okay, I will clarify on that one, on the basis that I'm talking about what the surface level, what people consider chaos magic to just be fucking sigils.
We're not talking about the philosophy. Then.
I'm not talking about the philosophy of actual chaos magic, which I think is quite clever, about the having a gnosis and following it through, regardless of whether or not that is part of your core practice as an experiment in order to prove a gnosis. I applaud that approach, but that is not the approach that is used and talked about on WitchTok and Insta witches and all that bollocks on the internet. Is not taking that approach of gnosis first, and actually taking it's narrow in its process because it's scientific in that way, of kind of going, I'm going to take this viewpoint and I'm going to keep going as long as I can in that direction until I get the end of this gnosis. Like that as a practice is admirable. Like I really, it's not my way of approaching things, and I wish I had more time to actually have a couple of goes at it myself. I think there's an aspect of that in what we do, but particularly as mentors, I think there's an aspect of that in what we do. But generally speaking, I'm not shitting on chaos magic. I am shitting on chaos magic with a K. That is a hashtag all over the internet that thinks sigil magic is chaos magic, because categorically it is not. Chaos magic actually has nothing to do with sigil magic. sigil magic is just one of the many expressions. But that's not the rant we're having today, Liam.
I'm not. Don't say it like that. That makes it sound like, oh, you started this, Liam. I answer fuck all so far, right? This has all been you. You've done the intro. You set the tone for this. It's a low tone. I'll give you that. As it always is when we talk about a book. But yeah,
I'm not knocking the attempt. I think the attempt to do something like this is an interesting attempt.
So the topic and the basis of the book. So what the book is actually supposed to be about, which is the first one's about. So it's all about the Kabbalah, isn't it? Kabbalistic Triad exploration, magical Kabbalah, from a Western perspective, particularly from the perspective of a Wiccan. So the book is designed to teach that from a Wiccan perspective for other Wiccans and such. The first book in the series is all about, presumably, the triangle of manifestation is what I was assuming that it was about. Is that right?
Yes, that's the impression I get.
What is it that you are suggesting, or why do you get that impression? Is it something from something in the comments? Is it something from the contents page, or what?
So I get it from, I have a tendency when I get a title of a book, I will also switch Google over to an image search. And in there is obviously a piece where this has been talked about, because obviously it's the first in the series, so it's been around longer. So therefore there's more opportunity for people to have talked about it on Pathos and places like that, where it's been talked about in forums. So because of that, there are some drawings that come with it that give this illusion. So my understanding from that, the few pictures that are about and the title, is the discussion has this focus on this focus of what we would call terror. So
terror is in terrorism.
No, a terror is in Earth
on the Kabbalic tree. Realm.
On the Kabbalic tree. Markuth. So yeah. So my assumption is that looking at that pyramid, so not even necessarily understanding it as manifestation, but describing it and doing their usual correspondence course stuff and applying the elements to the corners of a pyramid.
There's a bunch of, from what I'm understanding, not having read the book, there's a bunch of elements, 4 in fact, classical ones. And then in order to make those 4 elements, they're all kind of equal and balanced, give it another dimension, they add this extra element called spirit, which makes the 5th element, which gives you 4 points, which makes a square. Adding that extra point above on another dimension means that they all connect together to make a pyramid with a square base, potentially. So they make a 2-dimensional object, a 3-dimensional object, whereby thinking that they make the physical realm somehow connected to the next dimension, which would be the astral, presumably. Which from our situation, what we would normally talk about the triangle of manifestation is not that, it is the next triangle above that. So they're actually talking about the elements purely. It is presumably the first book is just about the elements, not about manifestation. It's really just about the elements, like every single fucking book is in the beginning of Wicca, often is to begin with, here are the elements.
So that's what we would call descent into matter. So something coming down the tree and manifesting in terror. So that's what that's where the 2 manifestations are described. So that's what I mean when I say something manifests solidly, 3rd dimensionally. And then obviously we talk about the triangle of manifestation, which is slightly higher than that.
I would suggest that it makes sense for the author to start there, because people that are reading are going to be humans and physical beings, therefore they're used to the physical world. Therefore, you're kind of starting at the bottom and working up. So starting from where they currently experience things, which is in, you know, the physical realm. Within, I think, Jewish mysticism and such, they do the opposite, don't they? They start with normally at the top bit, so the most out there. They would start from creation to understand, kind of like Big Bang style, where everything started, and follow the expansion of the universe or the creation of things till they get to the bottom and then work their way up again. Whereas I think this author is presumably just making several books, 3 books, for the 3 different parts. So the first part you would imagine would be the triangle of manifestation. However, I don't imagine it's actually even gone that far based on diagrams. I think it's just talking about elemental magic at that point, funnily enough, which you can read in Agrippa several hundred years ago. So, any interesting reviews or people that have reviewed such work? Because I think you said Ron did, didn't you?
Yeah, I'd read a lovely one from Ron, and I just I closed them all earlier, so give me 2 seconds to make them magically manifest again.
Where are you finding the reviews? Are they on Amazon?
No, I was looking at, I think it was the actual publisher's website. So I was looking at something on. Oh, why can't I find you?
And are we allowed to say who it was that started this discussion with us in terms of what mentee or not?
Oh, I'm sure we can. I don't think she'd be offended.
Okay. But it was the consultant killer, I think, brought it up.
Yeah, so her
was interested in the book.
Her question was an obvious one, which was basically like, is this a thing? Because they do, you know, it's one of these, like the witch's ladder. As soon as you say the witch is something or other, everybody's like, okay, well, is that a thing? Or are you just calling it a witch's something or other? So yeah, so it was just, you know, we spent a decent amount of time in the consultation just talking about, actually, you know, all these things that are being referred to, and know that you are right, they're not things. Someone has attributed in a very, you know, for lack of a better term, appropriative way of just kind of going, okay, well, I want to talk about this. In order to talk about this, I need to put it in a sphere that they'll like the, you know, things like the witch's alphabet. Well, it's not the witch's alphabet, it's a Wiccan alphabet. It's been invented by Wiccans for Wiccans to use. Didn't exist before. Is nothing historic, like, you know. But it means that people who are also given that information of, oh, well, there's a witch's alphabet, can go and find that very easily.
The witch's alphabet is in the witch runes that they use.
Yeah, the ones
they're in Agrippa as well. I told you they steal everything from Agrippa and give him none of the credit.
No, I mean, I don't mean the witch's runes. I know the ones you're referring to. No, I mean the witch's alphabet, the really swirly attempt at, so that they've got an equivalent to Enochian.
Oh, God, that's right.
So they wanted their own version of Enochian's writing. So they wrote.
They fucking did.
They wrote one. It all looks like little M's with little other things on. It's vaguely astrological. Here you go. We filibustered beautifully there, Liam. So there was a comment made, obviously, by Ron. Whether or not he was paid for this, I do not know, so I can't comment. But he says, I love the vivid imagery, powerful romanticism, kindliness, and earthly common sense of this book. To those fresh to the Tree of Life, this is an excellent introduction. For those with it, for those familiar with it, they will see it through fresh eyes.
Which you took to mean that he was shitting on it.
Well, I took that to mean he's being very polite, as to say, this is very cute, but
Right.
isn't going to teach you anything about Kabbalah. So I kind of took that as he's generally a friend to the Wiccans because they pay a lot of his bills. So, you know, and also he's a historian, so he's not going to, you know, fight something that is technically right. So I would say that what he's managed to do has stayed within the tradition of the Kabbalah from a Western mysticism kind of route. You know, the specific choice to use the C rather than the, like you say, the K or the Q, has separated it from the, you know, Hebrew mysticism route, which is where the really cool stuff is. Let's face it. The Western kind of watered down clinical version of it isn't anywhere near as exciting. And I think by reading,
it's supposed to be bare bones of making something work, where that is non-religious, isn't it? So, yeah.
So what's interesting, I find about it, is to do that, and then discuss it all through using Hebrew words in the actual contents list. Kind of sells a different version of the package. So I'm not sure. I'm unsold on it, but I can you know, it has an interesting setup. I can see I'm assuming there's going to be a heavy kind of Rosicrucian kind of leaning to it, Golden Dawny kind of look.
Well, he's got to have got the info from somewhere.
So
and it's probably from that book, The Golden Dawn.
Yeah. So yeah. So I'm guessing that that's where the appropriation is coming from. That it's kind of a Wiccan slant on looking and a kind of appropriating what's possible. Which for a bunch of very woke individuals, I'm intrigued to see how they take it. But then generally speaking, it's okay to steal from a white culture from another white culture. So that has less
or sage
thorniness
smudge
about it.
sticks are also fine, because they're so iconic apparently that's all right.
Yeah.
Whereas an Indian headdress isn't nearly as iconic as a sage smudge stick, you see.
No, of course.
And as they say, everyone hates the Jews.
So yeah, so I'm just very aware of certain potential issues that the woke world will have with it. I see it's very carefully tried to navigate it as a kind of, no, we're looking at this from a Western. But then again, I'm assuming they'll have more awareness than they may necessarily have. It may just be like any other Wiccan book that appropriates a whole list of deities from a whole list of different cultures, with no thought about it. So I might be being too kind to it actually, and assuming that they've given it some thought and they've gone for, you know, the C rather than, because I can't think off the top of my head from the Golden Dawn and from Doreen Valiente, I can't think which way she would write Kabbalah. Would she have gone big K or would she have gone big C?
I don't know, nor do I really give a shit, to be honest with you. I don't like any of those sorts of people, and I don't really fans of their work in general. I find them, you know, important, I suppose, because the 20th century wasn't all that long ago, so people consider that sort of thing to be important. I have mixed feelings like you, I think, about how important that sort of thing is. I think it's just recent, so people feel they owe a lot to it, and I'm not entirely sure whether they do or not, if I'm honest with you. But there we go. So it could potentially be good, because we've got the idea of taking what is presumably an exploration of Kabbalah, Western magical Kabbalah, mysticism, magic, and the tree of life, and trying to actually teach that in the form of a book, or from a practical perspective. I am presuming that that is the case, based on the fact that they've called the first one the witch's pyramid, I think it is, and then the second one the hexagram, and then the third one the trident, which makes sense. That, and if you're wanting to make maximum money, I suppose, then you would create a trilogy rather than just one book. But I'm presuming it's not that, and not being all pessimistic in that. I'm presuming that the reason why they split it out is to dedicate a certain amount of time to one specific area that's really important to learn before you move on to the next area. So I'm going to make that presumption, because I'm hoping that that's what they've decided to do, rather than just drag it out for 3 books. I don't know how long the book actually is. Is it one of those things that's like 800 pages?
No, each one's about 200 pages, if that. So they're not huge. I imagine, looking at them, they seem to have gone in a fairly natural order, although I don't understand their orders in which the pathways they've gone down. They've paid no attention to the fact that they are numbered for a reason, to give you a suggestion of the order they're supposed to go in, whereas actually they seem to be jumping around a bit. So yeah, and like you say, they go the kind of wrong way, which is why the numbers jump around so much, is because they're going up the tree rather than down, which I think is a really interesting point that we were talking about earlier today, which is about perspective.
Yeah.
And actually it makes a lot of sense. Now, obviously, Liam laughed, and because mine was obviously a very pointed way of putting it, which was essentially, you know, if you're stood next to the mountain looking at the pyramid and going, oh fuck, that's big, rather than looking at it from above, at which point it just looks like a crosshairs on a map.
A pyramid, from a pleb's perspective, like the people that built them, they look like a big triangle type thing. However, when you're looking from the heavens, from the skies and such, you look down at a pyramid, one with a square base simply looks like a square with a cross in the middle of it.
Yeah.
So when we look at our Kabbalistic tree, we see at the bottom what they're considering to be a pyramid is really just a circle with a cross in it.
Yeah.
Which would be what we were talking about with the consulting killer, I believe, wasn't it? So the perspective that people looking at the tree of life would not therefore see that as a pyramid or a triangle or anything like that. They'd just see, oh, well, that is the sign correspondence for that part, is the circle with the cross, as opposed to one of the other ones that's got a Hebrew name attached to it or a planetary name attached to it. And I think we're out of time for the regular edition of the ℍ𝕠𝕝𝕤 Witchcraft podcast. But I would like to sow the seed of doubt, potentially, because you highlighted earlier about the numbering system and maybe some Hebrew names and stuff like that. Are they using Hebrew in this? In the titles or something? Is that what you're saying?
In the titles, yeah. So obviously each section, it's talking about the path routes. So chapter 6, for example, is Markuth to Yesod. Then you've got 7 that is, you know, Yesod to Hod, etc., etc. So they're using the Kabbalic tree with its Hebrew names on it. They haven't attempted to do what we would normally do in Western interpretation of Kabbalah, and like stick planets on it, or stick kind of name the